Hi everyone, welcome back to the Headteachers Desk. If you are new to the channel, my name is Amy Luu. I'm an experienced head teacher in the UK and a leadership coach. Every effective school requires a clear and concise school development plan. But writing one isn't always as simple as you think, particularly if you're a new head teacher or if you're an experienced head teacher coming into a brand new school. So today in this video, I want to talk to you about some key things you must consider when you write your school development plan. So let's dive in. So the first thing to do is to set the right priorities. As a new head teacher, it can be daunting to identify what the right priorities are, particularly if you have the temptation to solve everything under the sun within your first term or your first year in your new school. This is where I would advise that you go back to basics. An analogy that I would use is to think about baking a cake. Let's not worry about the icing or the cake decoration. The first thing you've got to worry about is to get a really good recipe together with the right ingredients to bake a very delicious cake. Once you've got your cake, you can then think about how to make it look beautiful and appealing. So running a school is similar. So you've got to think about where the needs are in your school. Have you got the basics right? Now, this is where I would like to share with you a mistake I made early on in my headship. So I arrived at the school being brand new, my first headship, really excited, wanting to make a big difference to this school. So I set about some goals that I wanted to achieve in the school. One of the objectives I set was to improve the personal development in the school, including gaining an arts award for the school. Now, within the first half a term, I realized that was not very practical or effective because actually reading, writing and maths were not as strong and as secure as I thought. So when you set out priorities in your school, you have got to evaluate the provision very effectively first. You have got to see where the barriers are and whether you have got the basics in place. Curriculum, starting from there, for instance, before you go on about development in social, moral, cultural, and developing spiritual capital. That's just an example, but I'm sure you know what I mean. You've got to focus on the basics. Okay, so instead of setting out 5 or 6 key priorities over the course of the year, focus on 3 or 4 really urgent and impactful ones. I've seen new head teachers who I have mentored setting out a school development plan with 7 or 8 priorities. I would argue that if you've got 7 or 8 things on your to-do list, not everything on that list are priorities. So think carefully about setting out the right priorities in your school. Second thing that you need to consider is to build in flexibility in your school development plan. Your school development plan should not be a piece of paper that you plastered or displayed on your wall or upload it on the school website and be left alone. A school development plan is a working document, so it needs to have a degree of flexibility to respond to challenges that come out of nowhere. Because, as you know, school life is dynamic. Lots and lots of things change over the course of the year that you might not be able to anticipate. For example, staffing changes, or the needs in your school community change. Or if we were to go back a few years ago, COVID happened. So to have an effective school development plan, you need to build in a degree of flexibility so that your plan is really robust and resilient in order to weather any unexpected changes. So this is where I want to share with you a lesson that I learned as recent as last year in my current school. So I set about, at the beginning of last year, a school development plan with priorities to tackle reading and phonics alongside writing. However, as the school started, we realized that actually our staffing capacity changed. Therefore, I needed to move some members of staff to new areas of responsibility in school. Therefore, we were not able to focus on reading and phonics and writing at the same time. So, it is really important that you have some flexibility in your school development plan. Okay, moving on now to the third thing. I think I spoke about this in my previous videos. Running a school is not a solo mission. So new head teachers and a lot of other senior leaders might make a mistake in thinking that it's a solo mission. So your school development plan can't just be your plan of actions alone. So when you think about it, you need to see whether your plan reflects that distributive leadership model. Have you got the distributed structure of responsibility and workflow for the rest of your team? And does your plan reflect that? Because you cannot be responsible for all 3 or 4 priorities in your school. So you've got to think about who the leader would be for each area and who they need to work with in order to bring about the changes that are required. Without your involvement or without your direct involvement and leadership. So you've got to think about distributed leadership when it comes to your school development plan. You cannot be the only person that is responsible for driving the changes, responsible for monitoring the provision, and certainly you cannot be the only person that is accountable for the impact of your school development plan. Okay, now let's bring us to the 4th point. With any school development plan, you've got to be really clear of what the success criteria looks like. You've got to be really clear about what success looks like. How do you know whether your actions are on the right path? Your actions are bringing your school on the right track of improvement. And you can't do that unless you are very clear about ways that you can evaluate the effectiveness of your plan, the measures of success along the way. Now, I'm not talking about the end of the year measures of progress. you've got to build in those measures of progress along the way. Okay, so for example, let's go back to my story where I was trying to improve reading and phonics and writing. Okay, so I had to set out ways for me to evaluate our termly progress. Okay, so in reading and phonics, what is it that I need to see by the end of the autumn term in order for me to know, okay, we are on the right track and what we are doing is having that positive or intended impact. Okay, so you've got to think about breaking down that progress measure and have a very, very clear way to tell you and to tell your team that you're on the right track. So imagine when you put in your GPS for a route from A to B. Okay, so think about it as having your landmarks to help you to know that you are traveling in the right direction. For example, 3 miles down the road, you need to be able to see a Tesco or a petrol station. Okay, because if you don't see that Tesco 3 miles down the road, okay, chances are you might be going in the wrong direction. Okay, so in order for you to sustain your school development plan, you need to be very intentional about what that success would look like in the short term, in the medium term, and by the end of the year. Okay, so let's recap then. 4 things you must consider when you write your school development plan. Number 1, set the right priorities. Remember, you can't solve everything at once. So my recommendation would be pick 3 or 4 urgent or important or the priorities that would have the most impact on the teaching and learning in your school and ultimately on the pupil's experience in your school. So that's 1. 2, your school development plan needs to be a working document. It needs to be worked on with some flexibility to respond to unexpected changes and unexpected needs. Because without that flexibility, your school development plan is rigid. And what might happen when things are rigid? They will snap. So you need to make sure that your plan is robust, flexible, and resilient. And then the third thing is distribution of responsibilities and workflow. You yourself cannot be the only person who is responsible for leading, for monitoring, and being accountable for your school development plan. You've got to share out, you've got to involve the rest of your team because this plan needs to be owned by the rest of your team as much as you are leading it, owning it, and being accountable for it. And then finally, you need to be very clear with how you measure success. And don't just wait until the end of the year to realize that you have gone on in the wrong direction. So you've got to build in the short-term progress measures. How do you know term by term that you are moving in the right direction towards the end goal? Okay, so hopefully that has been helpful to you. And if you like the content of this video, please click like and subscribe. Please feel free to share with other school leaders and put in the comments below any other suggestions for writing an effective school development plan. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.